you are on your way out and heading to Costa Rica in a few hours.
Yep, getting ready to board the plane.
Yeah. So where are you coming from? Where were you traveling?
This trip was out to Indonesia. I was teaching yoga on a bit of a work trade at a resort out there called Nalungkala, which is this really cool concept. It's like a permaculture farm and eco-resort, catering to surfers and non-surfers. So it was a 6-month little internment that I was doing there.
Wow.
Wonderful experience.
Cool. So how did you get connected with that? Like, how did you even find this place and decide to go to Indo?
So I work a bit through the platform called Yoga Trade, which connects yoga teachers with job opportunities around the world, often at resorts in surfing destinations.
Not too shabby.
Which is exactly what I was doing when I met you in the Maldives.
Yeah.
That time I was working there on a different yoga trade. And this opportunity came about through a mutual friend who lives in Bali. And I had been traveling in Australia taking a course for my PhD and went up to visit her. And then she was family friends with the owners at the resort there. And so we went there back in February, and I really just connected with what they're trying to do there, especially because of my work in sustainable surfing tourism. So I wanted to go back and spend some time and really get immersed in their project.
What was your favorite or most surprising thing about Indo this trip?
So it was my third trip to Indo. I had been over to Bali a couple of times, and I was in West Sumbawa the time previously, and this time I was over in Sumba. What was interesting this time was to kind of compare the realities between Bali and where I was in Sumba, particularly related to the levels of development, and to have one place be still so pristine and still so, so much less developed.
Yeah.
And then the contrast with what Bali would have been like maybe 40 years ago, before kind of the surf exploration and then a lot of the overdevelopment and investment that's gone into that place. And just to kind of contrast, and especially thinking about, Sumba being at this crossroads where people are buying land, people are starting to develop surf resorts and surf camps, and just really sort of thinking about, all right, if they don't want this place to turn into another Bali, that there's going to need to be some sort of conversation happening among, local people and also people who have already started developing places down there.
Yeah. So double-edged sword for Bali, right? Because they have brought in the tourism from surf, so they have amazing funds coming in and local businesses are hopefully thriving, but then they have the footprint of travelers and plastic pollution and development and all kinds of things.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I think we should just dive into that because you're working specifically on that project.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Okay, so I work from an academic sort of activist perspective through the PhD program that I'm working on now in development studies. So I'm specializing in, it's called Decolonizing Sustainable Surf Tourism. So it's actually offering kind of a critical perspective on existing projects under the umbrella of sustainable surfing tourism to kind of push the envelope a little bit further to say, look, even the things that we're doing in the name of sustainability are still reproducing a lot of these global systems and dynamics that are still exploitative and marginalizing of people and also still pretty exploitative of the natural environment as well. So we can talk about sustainability in tourism, but the concept of tourism in the ways that it exists now, is still very unsustainable, so it's making an unsustainable process a little bit better, but, getting at sort of the root causes and talking about the systemic dynamics is a lot about what my work is.
Okay. So can you break that down a little bit more if you go back or when you go back and are starting to help with the tourism development and trying to make it maybe a little bit refined from what originally happened and how to be a little bit more thoughtful, what would your role be in trying to impact that new Bali or that new region?
Yeah. So when I go back to Costa Rica now, I'll be jumping into the field research project, which is the kind of main component of my PhD research. And the idea is to work with the community where I live, there in Playa Hermosa, which is near Santa Teresa. and facilitate some community conversations around where people want the trajectory of development to go, rather than just kind of leave it up to chance, which means that it's usually opening to a lot of foreign investment. Local people aren't necessarily the ones who are reaping the benefits of the tourism income that's coming through the town. So we see this happening in places all around the world, where waves get discovered, then a few people start trickling in, trying to set up businesses, and then you have these like big modern surf cities that we see, in Bali, in Costa Rica, in Hawaii, all the places where the surfing hotspots. And so the conversations would be around potentially some sorts of limits to growth. And that's the idea, not to have like a very blueprint model, because you do want to leave it open for the communities to really have their own determined futures for what they want their places to look like and how they want to steward the change. Right.
So how are you working with the locals? Are you doing roundtables, or like how do you get together and get immersed with the locals to get their input and their desire for how they want to see things unfold?
So what's cool about the town where I live is that there's already an existing surf instructor association, and they're already regulating who is allowed to teach surfing lessons. So my approach and the methodology that I'm working with is assets based. So rather than what often happens in development projects is you go in and try to figure out what the needs are, it's more about what's already existing. So I want to work already with the other kind of nonprofits that are existing in the area. The Nicoya Peninsula Waterkeeper is an important branch of Waterkeeper that's doing some really important work in the area. And then there's also a research station nearby called Sirenas, who I'll work with as well. So kind of those three main institutions, the Surfing Association, Sirenas, and Waterkeeper, to start some conversations there, because that's what already exists. And then it would be a bit of a mapping project, so mapping out what is already happening in the community from a community economies perspective. So rather than solely thinking about economy in kind of capitalist terms of, business owners, workers, goods and services being exchanged with money, we can think about more of like a solidarity economy and how people are already getting their needs met through the different assets that already exist in the community, and starting from there and strengthening those things as a means of not necessarily having to rely so much on the tourism income that comes in, but in a way that is a little more redistributive and also really intentional in terms of who is receiving the benefits of that income.
Okay. Where are you getting your PhD through?
It's through a university in the Netherlands called Wageningen.
Wow.
I can barely pronounce it, I know. And it's cool. It's an external program. So it's tuition free, but they fund me with a bit of a stipend to take courses in different places that are related to the content of my program.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Very cool. So as surfers traveling internationally, whether we're going to Bali or wherever in the world, Japan, what can we do for the brief time that we're there to make a positive impact on the community versus just going in, surfing, and leaving, and maybe going to the super popular places? Is there anything that we as surfers or visitors can do that you recommend to lessen our footprint or try to support the local community?
Yeah, so in a lot of the kind of sustainability and sustainable travel consulting that I do, I often get that question. And I like to respond that it's more of a mindset is how I see it, the mindset of being a visitor in someone else's home and really feeling that and really reflecting on what that means. So if you're going to someone else's grandmother's home is how I think of it. Like, you wouldn't just show up and start telling people what to do or have like a huge presence. You'd probably go observe for a bit, listen to some stories, try to see how you can fit into what's already existing rather than showing up acting as if you kind of own the place, you know? And I think about impact a lot, and I think as we're conscientious in the ways that we're traveling, we want to do something good, right? We want to have a positive impact in a place. But I like to kind of flip that and think about how can we have less of an impact as we travel through the world. So how can we tread a little bit lighter in terms of our ecological footprint, and also focus on locally owned businesses. If we are going to be staying in places and spending money in places, how can we support local economies rather than, only staying in an Airbnb that might be owned by, someone from somewhere else. So doing a bit of research before you go, that is one way to really make sure that the money that you are spending in a place is getting at least to people who are from the area where you're traveling.
Yeah.
Rather than supporting kind of this like global capitalist class.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I think everyone will really appreciate that tip. Where were you born? Where are you from? I'm just going to back way up.
Yeah, I was born in Colorado.
Okay.
My parents lived the hippie life in the mountains in Colorado in the 70s and 80s.
Awesome.
So I was born there in 85, and then shortly after we moved out here to Southern California, where I grew up in the valley, and then we moved when I was 10 to Tucson, Arizona, where I spent high school and did all that until I was 17 when I moved out to Washington, D.C. for college.
Okay.
So I was in school at Georgetown, and then my third year there, my junior year, I did a study abroad program in Costa Rica and just completely fell in love with it.
That's how it happened.
That's how it all happened, yeah. And it's been, I've been there ever since, so it's been 14 years that's been home.
Wow. Is that where you started surfing in,
Yep, exactly,
in college?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I picked it up when I was there. I was in the town of Jaco. That was like the weekends were always at the beach. I figured out a way to get all my classes onto 2 days in the city.
Nice.
And then the rest of the time I was just at the beach.
Wow.
And just made friends with some of the local instructors and would just kind of watch them giving lessons. And then halfway through my year, I was like, you know what, I'm going to give this a go.
Yeah.
And just bought a board and dedicated myself to it every single day.
Yeah.
In the white water, charging like a warrior.
Yep.
Taking my beatings, but just falling in love with it, right?
Awesome.
Getting stoked.
Well, you are a lady charger, because when we met in the Maldives, it was a scary day, at least for me, and I remember seeing this babe in this like gorgeous black bikini, or you had this really cute swimsuit. I remember saying like, I love your suit. I don't know if you remember this moment.
Yeah.
And then we started chatting, and we had a mutual friend in common, Catherine. Mm-hmm. And then I remember just watching you like charge this massive wave and be like, that chick is so badass. And it's crazy how you can be in the middle of the Indian Ocean, halfway across the world. You can meet someone, and now I'm sitting with you today, like chatting and sipping tea, and like just makes me really happy.
Yeah,
The surf world is a really small, intimate community, and we just share so many awesome things as surfers and water women, and so it's pretty cool to be like having this come full circle. And,
definitely.
Yeah, but I can tell you put your time in. It was my first time in the Maldives and in waves like that, so I was pretty intimidated. But you seemed like it was your natural happy place. Aww. So you were an inspiration to me that day, because I remember thinking, she can do it, I can do it, you know.
We can do it.
You know, when you're like newer, or not even, I'm not that new, but like waves are bigger and you see another woman charging and you're like, okay, she can do it, I can do it.
Yeah.
There's always this like encouraging camaraderie, even if you're not speaking about it. It's like, okay. So
definitely.
That's how I felt about you that day in the water.
Aww.
Yeah.
And likewise, I remember feeling inspired by you too.
Oh,
you know,
thank you.
Especially when you're pushing your limits in a place that you don't know that well.
Yeah.
On waves that might be a little above your comfort level.
Yeah.
But you're still there.
Yeah.
You know, you're hanging out, sitting in a position that feels comfortable for you.
Yeah.
And going for it. You know, and I remember that about you, and it's just like, yeah, she's charging.
Thanks, Tara.
Yeah.
So Costa Rica, 14 years. Do you ever have any kind of culture shock when you come back to the States?
Definitely, every single time. And I've done a few stints where I've come back and lived in San Diego for some writing work.
Okay.
So I've come back and lived for 2 or 3 months at a time. And at first, I totally feel like the fish out of water. And I just feel kind of like the little Costa Rica beach rat who comes back into the big world, you know? And then what happens, interestingly, is I notice myself kind of changing back into kind of, I don't know, a little more feeling like insecure a little bit and feeling like I need to do all the things to keep up with the lifestyle and like wear makeup. And, you know, I'm sitting in traffic and just kind of doing the things that I never do at home. And then I start noticing myself adapting to the lifestyle here. And it's like my red flags come up to myself, and I'm just like, okay, it's time to go home.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
I don't mean that in like a negative way at all, just knowing that it doesn't really fit me.
Yeah.
And then feeling myself kind of getting into that sort of world, you know, because your culture gets stuck onto you. You get sticky with it. It changes who you are, and you adapt to it. 'Cause that's just, we're creatures like that.
Yeah.
And just knowing that I don't feel like my best self.
Yeah. So I would love to talk a little bit about your writing. And is that what you studied for your undergrad?
It wasn't. No, writing has always been something that I've done, especially creative writing, for as long as I can remember. Like when I was little, writing stories for my aunties for their birthdays and things. And then I've done some work professionally as a writer, but it was never what I studied. My background was in international politics and Latin American studies and peace studies. But the writing has always really supported my academic career. And then as I guess it's really been more of a professional pursuit after I finished my master's. And then I wanted to be able to bridge the worlds of academia and kind of popular culture to share my work there as well.
Yeah. So are you working on anything right now in particular that you want to share or highlight?
Sure. Yeah. For the writing stuff, right now it's actually been very academic focused. But in the past 6 months or so, I've been writing a lot around surf feminism.
Awesome.
So I've shared a few stories on my website around different experiences I've had that have really kind of touched on feminist issues in surfing culture and outside of surfing culture. So I've used my own experiences to kind of highlight those realities and shed some light on these broader dynamics that we're facing in the water, that we're facing on land as women surfers and as women walking the world.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about that? Give a little teaser,
teaser.
And then I will direct people to your website and link to the full story.
Sure. So the one that's coming into my mind right now is the one, I believe I called it a surf feminist story. And it was about a recent trip I took to El Salvador. And just all the different layers of kind of misogyny and machismo in Latin culture that was kind of coming at me as I was just trying to go for surf, right? Go try to do the thing you love the most in a place with incredible waves. Yeah. But kind of really recognizing my own vulnerabilities in ways that I hadn't necessarily before, and kind of confronting those in a new light. Both in terms of like the physical security of my body and realizing that I was safer having a man with me than I would have without him there, but then also recognizing that some of his mentalities still really reproduced these sort of misogynist and machista dynamics that I'm really not comfortable with. So
what was it like, catcalling in the water?
Oh yeah. So
were you one of the few or only women in the water?
Definitely. So when I was there, I was the only woman in the water, which isn't to say there aren't many women surfing in El Salvador. There are. Yeah. But during that particular trip, it was, I was the only woman out, the only one in the bikini. So it's often like subtle things, right? So either it's men get super chatty with you, want to know your story, how you end up, doing the things you do, living in Costa Rica, supporting yourself. You don't have like a sugar daddy in tow, right? Yeah. Paying the bills to support your lifestyle. So I think there's some admiration that goes into that as well, but it's often like a little bit of one-upmanship and wanting to be sure that you kind of know your place. I find that happens a lot, and that's what I mean about it being a little bit subtle. Yeah. And then, of course, always just like that story, I think it was called Pussy Peepers. That's right. That's the one I called Pussy Peepers, because literally every person I met on the street would just like stare at my crotch.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Like from all different cultures, people from all different places. It was just like, is this the new thing?
Yeah. That is the perfect title for that.
Pussy Peepers. Yeah. And so there was definitely some like catcalling on the street, a little bit of just like one-upmanship, kind of dominant male vibes in the water. Yeah. And then some instances where I definitely felt really unsafe, even when the man I was traveling with was with me, and we had this experience like being in the back of an oyster truck and then stopping at these oyster divers' home to pick up some oysters. We had just caught a ride, and there was just like an awkward interchange where I think like it looked as if the guy who also got a ride was maybe like had a weapon on him, or he was like selling some drugs or something, so we didn't really know what was going on. But when we got back to our little room, there was this conversation that happened about like the way I dress making us more vulnerable where we were. Wow. And so I, of course, lost my shit. Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Like it's your fault because you're dressed like that.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. And there was a comparison between a GoPro and my vagina. That, if I have a GoPro, I don't just whip it out in the barrio in the hood. And I was like, actually, I can't just leave my vagina in the safe in the hotel room when we go out on the street. And it doesn't really matter if I'm wearing shorts or I'm wearing like full coverage, whatever. Yeah. Everyone knows beneath a thin layer of fabric is my vagina. Yeah. So I'm vulnerable by birth as a woman walking the world.
Yeah. And that's a crazy heavy topic and a feeling that only we will understand.
Totally.
One of my friends was telling me this story, and I can't remember who the rapper was, but he was saying the first time he made like a significant amount of cash, and he wanted to keep it all in his backpack, and it was like 30 grand, and he had it in his backpack, and he was walking the streets, and he suddenly had this overwhelming feeling, and he said, "This is the first time that I know what it feels like to be a woman." And to be so vulnerable, and to be like, to have something potentially, be violated or have something happen for what he has on him. And it was this like analogy, and he said he's never had that realization before until he was carrying all this cash. And I thought that was pretty interesting. And I'm like, whatever it takes for guys to realize like this is our life. It's, for them to go travel solo, it's like no big thing. For us to travel solo as women, especially in places like El Salvador, where we just want to go surf good waves, like there's just so many different dynamics.
So many different layers of courage and kind of street smarts that you really kind of pick up, as you're going. Like you have to carry yourself in a different way.
Can you give me any quick tips on that?
Quick tips. Well, it's often, a little bit about doing things that you would do at home anyway, like not walking by yourself late at night, not walking the beach by yourself late at night. Often in the day, I've had like creepy men jumping out of the bushes in the middle of the day.
Really?
Yeah, like showing me their junk and like, hey, look over here. Yeah.
In El Salvador?
That's actually been in Costa Rica, unfortunately.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's anywhere.
Yeah.
It's everywhere. It's happened in the States where people are just kind of exposing themselves to, or like jerking off in the car, you know, and like, hey, look over here.
Yeah.
It's just, so just kind of taking that extra level of protection when you're alone.
Yeah.
And not to mean like don't go out and do things on your own, but just being extra aware of where you are and what your surroundings.
And not being on your phone, like
fully. And not like being flashy about what you have with you too, because that's like an extra layer if someone's going to want your stuff. And also really, really trusting your intuition. Like I know I've had situations where I feel like this is a sketchy situation, and rather than waiting to see, I just get out. Like I've had a moment, I remember being in Ecuador traveling alone, and was on this like colectivo bus, because it was like a holiday weekend and the regular buses were super full, and then someone like called a bunch of people, and I was the only woman on the bus. And I looked around and I was just like, this could go badly. And I got off and I walked back to the regular terminal and got like a regular bus. And who knows, it could have been fine. But in that moment I didn't want to find out.
I think we've fallen away from trusting our gut and our intuition because we rely so much on Google or whatever, right? So we're like almost disconnected from ourselves. One thing that is really interesting to me, so I've worked in mental health for 16 years. I've worked in corporate America, if you can believe it, and I still do for 16 years. But I work in mental health and substance abuse, so I think that's been the one thing that's kept me attached to corporate America, because I'm working with the program that I believe so deeply in. But is there anything that comes to mind as far as, when I bring that up that you'd like to share?
A few things actually, and recently it's become a lot more present in my day-to-day practice. And I use that word intentionally because I think our mental health and our self-care practices and rituals are interdependent. So the more that I know in my own personal life that I focus on doing the things every day that help me feel centered and help me feel like me. For example, I have a daily journaling practice. I try to surf every day when I'm at home or when I'm traveling somewhere where there's surfable waves. And I try to get a yoga practice in like 5 to 6 days a week, and that's like a full morning of self-care. But so many of us are so sensitive, and the sorts of modern lifestyles that we lead don't necessarily allow us the time to really take care of ourselves in the ways that nurture our mental health. So I've really realized that in myself, I get like a lot more anxious, and I do suffer from anxiety. I get a lot more anxious if I'm not really focusing on my self-care and also, nourishing foods and taking care of myself that way as well. And then in surfing, it's been really interesting. In the past 5 years or so, I've felt a lot more panic and anxiety in the surf. Not even necessarily on bigger days. Like there'll be normal sized days where I just like feel really nervous even having to duck dive, or, what if it gets bigger? Like just like this kind of these patterns of anxiety that like pop up in me where I don't even feel that safe anymore in the ocean. And that was something that just started happening in the past 5 years, right? So I actually take kava before I go surf.
I've heard about kava. Yeah.
And
in what form?
In a capsule.
Okay.
In a capsule form, so you don't feel like dazed out or anything. Yeah. And the only counterindication is if you have liver disease. But it just takes the edge off, I find. Like, and I do it sometimes. Like, I could have taken a kava before I came to do the podcast if I was feeling a bit nervous.
Yeah.
Before I need to give, like, an academic presentation, sometimes I will if I'm feeling jittery. Because you just feel like you again. Yeah. You know, it takes the edge off. It's not addictive. You know, you don't become dependent on it. But sometimes if it's, like, a big surf day and I'm feeling my heart pounding, or I start feeling like, you know, I shouldn't even go out, it's too big, you know. Obviously, you know your limits. Yeah. But Papa Kava.
Yeah. Papa Kava.
Papa Kava. And you're still fully in control of your body and you surf the same. You're just not as panicked.
Yeah. You're not as in your head, it sounds like. How did you get introduced to kava?
Me mama.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, so she's
a wellness warrior.
She's a wellness warrior. Exactly, I like that. And so she has given her clients kava all the time for anxiety, and you don't need like a pharmaceutical drug. You know, you can find it in your health food store. Yeah, and it's traditionally Fijian remedy that people would take, leaders would take before they'd get into kind of conversations for decision making or conflict resolution. They would drink some kava tea and then have a chat. So it just kind of takes the edge off.
Awesome. Do you ever have it in tea form?
Sometimes, yeah, but more like in a nice little like kava tea house. I imagine you could find that around LA somewhere.
Yeah, very cool. Nice. What does your journaling ritual look like?
It's 3 pages a day.
3 like big notebook pages?
Any notebook.
Any notebook. Just like check off 3 pages of free form.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I borrow that from The Artist's Way, which is a program. Okay. It's a book that's beautiful, and it's been so supportive of my creative process. Because it kind of forces you to really take hold of creativity as a lifestyle. And she calls them the morning pages. Wow. So her idea is to do it very first thing in the morning. I don't always do that because sometimes the surf is firing first thing in the morning and that takes priority.
I'll come back to you, journal.
I'll come back to you. So sometimes it's afternoon pages or evening pages or whatever, but it's rare that I skip a day. Okay. So, you know, you can take 20 minutes for your writing for yourself every day.
Yeah. And then do you do any form of meditation?
I do, and I have been getting into more meditation recently. I just read this incredible book called Womb Wisdom. And so I've been doing these heart and womb meditations that are incredible. You can literally start feeling like the pulse of your womb and have these like beautiful releases and processing, and you just get into this, you know, your meditative trance. But you're accessing like your deep womb wisdom and your womb connection, which as a woman has been really, really cool.
That is so awesome, Tara. Thank you for all these interesting and awesome tips. I'm going to go home and look all these things up and link to them in the show notes, because I think that it's things I have never heard of, and it's always cool to hear what other women are doing. So I think the topic of self-care is so incredibly important.
Likewise.
And I just, like you said, in this modern world and with so many people in general working these crazy jobs, we just don't make the time. You know, you have to get up maybe an hour earlier to spend 30 minutes writing and 30 minutes stretching before, because that for me it's always about morning, because I usually sit down with tea and have tea quietly for 30 minutes and do my own little tea ceremony, and then do like 5-minute journal or something. And try to plan out my day or read 30 minutes in a book, versus if I try to read at night or do any of those things at night. Sometimes I'll do tea at night right before I go to bed, and just try to like not have my phone and sit quietly, because I'm really squirrely. So if I try to just sit and meditate, I'm just like, I can't do it. I just need to practice more, but I prefer something more of an active meditation, so I can sit and have tea, and it's more, you know, I'm thinking about the plant I'm taking in and being more conscious of
mindful.
That. So I always recommend anything in the morning if you can knock it out, but like you said, just incorporating 2 to 3 priorities, whatever those are for you. Write them down and then try to make it happen, and see how you feel different. Like do it for 30 days or 60 days, and then be like, do I feel different from journaling every day? I feel like it would be impossible to say there isn't some kind of positive change that comes out of that.
Totally. It's your connection with yourself, you know? Yeah. That's what I love about journaling. It's literally a conversation with yourself.
Yeah. I love that. Awesome. you have this amazing life, and I think anyone listening to this episode is going to be like, man, I wish I had this awesome life. And she travels the world and works in sustainability and tourism and surfs every day and is confident traveling solo. Is there any, I guess my question for you is, did you always know you would be a woman who would design your own life? Did you have any clues growing up that, or what kind of helped shape this path of being so confident and independent? Because that's something a lot of women strive for. And I know they'll look up to you when they hear this podcast and hopefully inspire them to do something different. Yeah.
I think in a way, a lot of it stemmed from how I was raised and kind of the life that my parents charted for themselves. That was always a little bit outside the norm, right? Yeah. So they both left the town where they had grown up. They met in the mountains of Colorado, living the hippie life. My dad had started a record store there, and then my mom ended up working for him. So they were both kind of like rebel children, wanting to kind of leave the nest and start and chart their own way. So that was the example I had growing up. Like, my dad was self-employed in the music business for years. My mom is a wellness professional. She's, works in Chinese medicine. She's a yoga teacher and a massage therapist.
Awesome.
I call her the hippie triple threat.
That's a great nickname.
But it is, and like only in reflection later on in adult life do you look back and say, oh, my parents had this incredible influence on me. Yeah. Being able to see a different sort of life where they were thriving and living their dreams, raising my sister and I, and also doing things in ways that were very different from the mainstream. So I think that definitely factored in a big way. And then I always just kind of had this obsession with freedom growing up. I was never one to really feel that comfortable with authority figures. I was always a little bit rebellious. Yeah. Just never okay with the concept of someone else having power over me. Yeah. Whether that's in a construct of a work relationship where there's a boss. I really believe in dynamics where everyone is empowered in ways that support them in bringing out their best self and their unique contributions to the world. So even from a young age in school, I was often like in a bit of a conflict with teachers or things like that. I was always interested in school, but when there was a little bit of a power struggle or like a control dynamic, I was rebellious to it, and I recognize that now as a strength for the type of life that I've been able to live, that I'm not really that interested in, I guess, fitting into that mold, and really seeking out sources of freedom where I can find them.
Did you ever work any type of traditional corporate job at all?
Yeah. So, well, not corporate job, but I mean, in high school I worked at like restaurants and stuff. Yeah. And through college as well, to help pay the bills. Yeah. And then after I graduated, when was it? After my master's program, I went back and tried to move back to Washington, D.C. and get a job at a nonprofit, which is this really cool nonprofit that does a lot of research around leftist Latin American politics. So the work itself was really inspiring and stimulating, but being in an office 9 to 5 just sucked my soul, and I couldn't do it. Yeah. So I lasted, I think, 4 months. Ah, nice. Maybe if there was an ocean in vicinity, it would have been different, because I had already, been surfing for years by then, and just like not surfing, living back in the city life. Just, feeling like I was contributing in a way because I was getting to research and write and really delve into my passion of Latin American politics. But the other side of that kind of like nature connection and being in the place that really nurtured my soul wasn't there. Yeah. So I knew it wasn't going to last.
Yeah, but you tried it. 4 months.
I tried it,
a long time. 4 months. Well, one question I think that people always have is, you live in Costa Rica, you travel a lot, you're a writer, how do you sustain your lifestyle? Yeah. How do you pay your bills? And I know that can be a really personal question, but if you don't mind talking a little bit about finances, and I think everyone's always interested to hear about that. Yeah.
I actually love that question because it gives me a bit of an opportunity to share from my experience about living kind of a simple, more of a minimalist lifestyle, where you don't need to have like a 6-figure income to live a quality life. Yeah. Even, when that's sort of like the idea that we've been conditioned to believe as a source of our well-being, when really it detracts from the things that make us happiest. So my own personal financial strategy is more about covering my day-to-day needs and also doing a lot of things that I'm able to trade my skills to receive the things that bring me joy. Like, for example, I'll trade writing to do like a yoga subscription at the studio down the street. So I'll take classes in exchange for supporting some content development for the yoga instructor's website, or writing a story that then she can share with her yoga community, for example. So I do a lot of writing work on trade. I trade for bikinis, like the bikini you were pointing out in the Maldives.
Awesome.
One of my close girlfriends has a bikini line, De Coco. She's Costa Rican, and she produces in Nicaragua.
That's the one you were wearing?
That's what I was wearing, and that's like one of my favorite Lucky Surf bikinis. I love it. So I do some trade for her for content development. But in terms of supporting myself financially, because obviously we need an income to survive and take trips and things like that, the writing work sustains me. So commission writing projects, whether it's content development or different stories that people commission or articles. And then also I've recently been getting more into retreats. So I've been doing a retreat a year, 1 or 2, and then supporting other people's retreats as like a guest facilitator and things like that. So I've been doing surf, yoga, and writing.
Awesome.
So my partner is a surf instructor, and then I'll do some of the yoga, and then we do them in Santa Teresa, where there's a beautiful yoga community already. So I take our retreat guests to some of the different classes around. Like there's a beautiful tantric hatha teacher and a kundalini teacher and candlelit yin on the beach, you know, so it just combines all the things. And then the writing workshops every day in the afternoon, and it's been wonderful. So
That's awesome, Tara.
It's really about like matching, you know, the gifts and contributions I want to make and supporting women in particular on those retreats. And what's been beautiful is often through the writing, it's these profound processes of transformation where women are able to kind of see into their own dreams and break down the barriers that they have in themselves in order to step more fully into the lifestyle realities that they want to create for themselves.
And you don't have to be a good writer to take any...
Not at all.
Okay.
That's kind of the point. You know, right? I think we all like have a little bit of blockage around our writing. But no, I do like journal prompts and different like workshop prompts. And you don't even have to share it if you don't want. You know, it cannot be all for you.
Cool. When is your next retreat?
I don't have one planned at the moment, but we've been doing them mostly in March in Santa Teresa, but I'm looking at a few new partnerships, potentially with De Coco. We're talking about doing retreats together.
Awesome.
Which is, you know, why haven't I thought of that before?
Yeah.
Really, hello. So that's how it's been going. It's been like linking up with people who are into similar things and drawing from one another's networks to offer beautiful experiences to people. So I'm looking at March, but check in on the website. There'll be some updates.
Is that a good time to surf in March in Costa Rica?
Yeah, it's when the southern swells begin, and it's usually pretty offshore. Still in that time frame. So but it's
manageable,
really
like
manageable,
not
definitely.
too crazy.
No. And where we go, there's always a wave. So if it's big, kind of on the beach breaks, there's like a point break around the corner.
Cool.
So
awesome.
we make it work.
So what's your website in case someone was interested in joining one of your future retreats or checking out your writing?
My website is tarantulasurf.com, tarantula like the spider. And then my Instagram is also Tarantula Surf, and you can find me on Facebook with the same.
Awesome. Where did you come up with the name Tarantula Surf?
So in Spanish, my name is Tara. So I lived most of my life as Tara in Costa Rica, and then friends I surf with just started calling me Tarantula.
That's perfect.
And it's perfect. And then it just sort of evolved from there. When I was thinking of the name for my blog originally, it was like, all right, Tarantula Surf. I didn't really put too much thought into it. But I like thinking about it, especially as someone who comes from the desert. Like, I'm thinking about a desert tarantula who then gets into surfing years later in life, you know. So just thinking about it as a space for possibility, which is the little tagline on my website, where even a desert-dwelling tarantula can go surf the sea.
I love it. Is there anything else that you want to share or highlight, or you can think about that you want to share with the Salted Spirit community that would be interesting or cool?
Yes. So the project that I mentioned at the very beginning around sustainable alternatives and surfing tourism, I'm actually going to be launching a Kickstarter program to help fund that project. Cool. So I'm launching that ideally in September. So whenever we air or whatever with this podcast, it would be great to kind of put the word out to the Salted Spirit community and get some interest around, just the idea of possibility, right? Exploring alternatives, seeing what we can do, and the funding would support salaries for local people who are interested in this project. So that's the only thing that I'm really fundraising for, is to support local salaries for the project.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, let me know when that
I
goes
will.
live, and I will be sure to post it.
Thank you.
And yeah, thank you for being on the show and for doing the very first van interview with me.
Thank you. I
and
can't wait to
making it
sip this
out.
tea you just made for us.
Yeah.